right, guys. It is now 10:16, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people are still rolling in. Good morning. Hopefully your first session went well and you're not halfway asleep already. My name's DeAndre Riley. I work for NCDOT Utilities, and I'm the room host today. Today we have two presentations lined up. We have some updates and initiatives for utility cost responsibility presented by Keith Gary of NCDOT Utilities. And we also have a second presentation going to be given on NC Commercial Fiber Partnership presented by Dave Jones. And he's going to tell us about some of our state infrastructure. So without any further ado, pull up your PowerPoint, Keith. There we go. And do you want me to man the stage?
Start from the beginning. All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks, y'all, for joining. So you all had some choices today, right? So there are 5 sessions going on, and you chose this one. So good choice. Thank you all for being here. So I'm Keith Gary in the State Utilities Office. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that have been going on in the State Utilities Office over the past 2.5 years or so. We have a lot of initiatives going on, actually, but we're going to talk specifically to some that pertain to utility cost responsibility. So as we get ready to dive in a little bit more, why these changes, right? So for those of you who have worked in the industry for a while, you probably have observed over the years there's been some discrepancies perhaps in how utilities are handled, say in one part of the state versus another part of the state. The decisions that we're making are maybe not in alignment with how we've made decisions in the past. So why is that, right? There's a lot of things that lead into that. If you think about over the past inside the last 20 years, we had, decentralization, right? So what happened? All of a sudden now there's 14 divisions, each running their own program, and then inside those divisions are district offices and maintenance offices, right? So just from the realm of utilities, all of a sudden you have, 50 plus different offices plus central, managing utilities, for their scope of work. So with that, over time, right, you can kind of expect to see some variance. People retire, and then maybe the training or the backfilling looks different. So there's a myriad of reasons why we kind of got to where we were. So one of the things that we wanted to do is take a harder look, pull the layers back, and understand what are we doing, how can we be doing better to help support just consistency across our organization. And consistency is not just going to help NCDOT, it will also help our utility partners, right? So think about if you're running a business trying to build out utilities and serve your customers across the state of North Carolina, and then you are being required or asked to do something in one division, and then the next division it looks a little different. So it's hard to build a consistent operation, which we will hear about, right, with those inconsistencies occur. Also, being fiscally responsible. We pay out millions of dollars a year to utility relocations. So it's really important that we understand why are we paying for a relocation. Is it in alignment with our general statutes? Is it in alignment with what we can do? Because we do not want to get into a situation where if we ever get audited by FHWA or OIG, we want to be able to say confidently we relocated because of X, and here's our math. So there's a little bit of background. So we're talking about 4 primary changes. Let's see if I can get this thing off without breaking it. I hate being stuck to the podium. All right, here we go. So one of the first things that we started to deep dive and peel layers back on, we have a lot of situations out there where the utility companies are challenging or questioning our right-of-way, right? How many folks out there have had a project like this, right? Utility company, we're all kind of, out of misalignment. So if you went into our UAM, it's actually our current public-facing UAM, and you go to this section 4.16, there's not a lot of detail in there that offers what we need to see to support claims of prior rights. It kind of touches on it. We have, for the past almost maybe 6 or 8 months or so, we are in the process of updating our UAM. So we have a separate work group that we're going through A to Z. And we have made some changes. And it's not public facing yet. But what you will see when that becomes published, and we've already soft launched basically. Everything I'm talking about today, we're already implementing. Okay, but one of the big things you'll see here, the second bullet, you'll see this throughout the new UAM. The companies need to provide clear and convincing evidence. And for those of you who have been in courtrooms and worked with legal, that's a favorite verbiage right there. Clear and convincing evidence, right? The burden of proof, is on the onus is on the utility company. And our general statutes are very clear on what are the instances that we can reimburse. The utility needs to have an easement under which it contributed to the cost of, or a utility follows up one of our general statute easements, a municipality. We have several cases going on right now where we are in discussions, mediation with municipalities on challenges just like this here. We are getting pretty close to getting into similar mediation discussion with a prominent utility company. So, it's important that we have good understanding in our policies and procedures, for how should we be, I call it practicing utilities, right? So that's one of the big changes right here. We're really digging in. I'm really proud of our divisions. I mentioned to you that we've already soft launched everything that we're talking about today. The divisions have done a great job of latching on to all of the information we're going to talk about today and implementing it, in their respective business units, and we're seeing a big change. So this is one of the first items. The second one, okay, pre-existing and overlapping utility easements. So what I mean by this, say there's an existing gas pipeline easement that crosses our L, so that was there before our project. When I say overlapping, I mean a lot of utility companies like to think, well, your right-of-way overlaps with our utility easement. Okay, well, that one kind of perplexed me for a minute. So I look out across the state, at what we're doing on our projects, and I see where we are entering, into encroachment agreements with utility companies, not our agreements, their agreements, where we're signing off saying we're going to abide by your terms and conditions, utility company, for the portion of the project that's in our right of way, but it's overlapping theirs. So that I'm thinking to myself, what are we doing here? We're signing off on agreements that are really limiting our means and methods, and is that even legal, right? So we dug in on this, and it's pretty clear in the UAM. Subordinate claims are to be extinguished. In our right-of-way manual, all interest should be eliminated from the property being acquired. And if you go up in the statutes, there cannot be, the state is the sovereign, right? You can't have these underlying easements. So what did that allow us to do, right? So once that became 100% clear, it wasn't all of a sudden, we're the state. You all need to just listen to what we say. That was not, all this did right here. This helped us to solidify that an easement cannot exist on our right of way, and all that energy that we were spending, fighting and dickering with utility companies, we can now focus on how to move forward on a project. Okay, we stopped signing encroachment agreements. And I'm going to share with you all some examples of some encroachment agreements. And then we stepped forward with our transmission I call them the utility companies that have those easements are typically the transmission utility companies. It's important that we have a perspective with them. It's not about us taking over or acquiring parts of their easement. While that may be true, we also want to make sure that we're still allowing them safe access to their easement. A lot of these companies have slope requirements. If we're going to be putting a fence up, do we have a gate? Are we making their ability to maintain their assets worse than they are today? So we'll actually look at that perspective, and what can we do with our design, partner with those companies, to give, make sure that they can safely maintain, own, operate, maintain inside their easement. That perspective it goes a long way with the utility company versus just saying, hey, our right-of-way snuffs your easement, sorry, go do something else, right? It's not a mutual approach. So here are a couple snippets. These are from some actual encroachment agreements. This is from a particular encroachment agreement from a utility company. I know you can't read all this, but I just wanted to kind of share, bullet number 4 up on top is this is talking about if the utility company here who owns this particular agreement, if they have to make an adjustment to their facility because of something DOT does, we have to pay for their relocation, right? This is all in our right of way, right? The second one, of course, you see this a lot, indemnification. They're wanting NCDOT to indemnify and hold harmless the utility company, in all of their assigns. This is not something the department wants to enter into, right? This is, and then the last one here, this example, this basically says that if the utility company has to perform any maintenance or do any work inside of the overlap area of the right-of-way and easement, they pretty much have the right to go in and, rip out guardrail, bust up our road. They don't need to put the road back in, to our, our standards. Now, all they're obligated to do is they'll fill with soil any trench or ditch that they create, right? So that is not a good agreement for the department. So there again, we don't even enter into encroachment agreements, right? So if y'all are in project development or utility coordination teams, and you are at a point in your project where a company is asking you to sign an encroachment, make sure you call our state utilities office. We definitely want to not step in that direction. So this is, I'm going to talk for just a minute. I said a couple slides ago, one of the things that we want to do as a department is collaborate with our transmission utilities, those transmission easement utilities, for how can we work better together on our projects. So we've been talking a lot with Duke Energy Transmission, who has a lot of transmission easements across the state of North Carolina, and they have agreed to pilot this program with us, North Carolina DOT. All the 7 states that they operate in, they're not doing this. This is just with us. It's basically, we're calling it a preliminary low-no process, or letter of no objection. So for those who aren't familiar, anytime you're dealing with Duke Transmission even FERC, I don't know if people dealt with FERC. Duke oversees the FERC program here in North Carolina. You need to provide a set of final sealed plans for the portion of our highway project that is impacting their transmission utilities, and they need to review it and sign off that we agree or we don't agree, you need to change X, Y, Z. Well, obviously, as you can imagine, waiting for final sealed plans is way too late in the game to be hearing feedback from Duke about how we need to change something way back in our stage 2 PDN. So we talked to them about, hey, look, can we come to terms, say at stage 2, we kind of drew a line in the sand with right-of-way plans or CFI. You work with us, Duke, to give us comments early during design. We can modify our plans as needed. We get to a point where Duke, you can own, operate, maintain safely in your easement. We're still getting our scope of the project developed. We both sign off in this agreement, right? We go and start acquiring right away, because there's been a lot of instances out there, and I'm sure we've seen it in the past, where we'll get 50-60% in the right of way. All of a sudden, oh, by the way, we've got transmission on the project, and they don't like this, so we're having to dial all the way back and start over. So the purpose of this is to get sign-off by a department, by Duke, early in plan development, right before we're going to right-of-way, okay? If there are any changes to the plans, and it happens, right? Property owners and other challenges, we have to go back, share that, make sure we share that with Duke. And then, if any changes are needed, we'll make those, as needed. But the end game is, by the time we get to final sealed plans, they've been part of the process with us throughout the entire project development cycle. And there are no surprises, and that the final loan-o comes, easy peasy. So some people may ask, well, we're DOT, it's our project. Why do we care to get a loan-o? They're going to exist in their easement outside our right-of-way. Who cares? Well, there again, if we develop our project without consideration for what a transmission utility, what's important to them, they can, they'll say, hey, this is a claim, an impact, and they may initiate a relocation process that has, they may be construction, conflict-free from our project, but if they can't get in there and access and maintain, they may initiate a relocation that didn't need to occur, right, in that it's not part of, an impact to our project directly, add years and dollars to our project. So the best approach with our transmission utilities is to start early, understand what's important to them, and try to develop our plans collaboratively together. This is just a snip of, it's a multi-page document. I think they're getting ready to issue the first, I'm calling it a preliminary loan, or they're calling it a conceptual provisional letter of no objection. I think I got a project here this month that they'll be issuing the first one, right? And so all behind this are all of the terms and conditions that we agreed to from a development standpoint. And something else that they asked for, and I certainly understand why, they would like to see some more information included in the project special provisions and in our contract documents for the contractor's visibility, right? So we do all this work up front in pre-construction, and we let a project. Well, they want to make sure that the construction team has visibility to, hey, if you got an issue with Duke, here's your contact, here are your requirements, here are the clearances, no borrow pits in our easements. And so, that makes perfect sense. So we'll be working towards including that type of information in our projects. So. All right, so I mentioned there were 4 things that, some big, changes, if you will. The third one, utility joint use agreements. So I don't know how many millions that we have spent over the past several years reimbursing a utility company based on the existence of a joint use utility agreement. So, for those who may not know, a JUA is simply it's an agreement amongst multiple companies. It's typically a power company and 1, 2, 3, or more telecom attachees. Sometimes they'll one organization may own poles, or there's understanding for if for rent. A lot of them are paying rent to the actual pole owners. So a lot of operational type agreements are rolled up into the JUA. So these JUAs, they do not convey land rights. Okay, that was pretty clear. Once we started diving into the statutes and looking at what we can and can't do. So we no longer accept these. Okay. You can see on the last bullet, and we talked about this, before. For a utility to be reimbursable, if they're not a municipality, they have to have an easement, and they have to show where they contributed to the cost of that easement. All of those telecoms that are signed up on that JUA did not contribute to the cost of the easement. Therefore, we cannot legally reimburse those companies. So we soft launched this about this time last year. And I can tell you, from talking with the divisions, it's been a while since a company has come at us requesting reimbursement based on the JUA. Right? So there again, that was a consistent rollout that we did DOT-wide. The utility companies were hearing that consistently from all of our divisions. This is not what we're doing. And those requests have stopped. There again, just joint use agreements, millions of dollars over the past several years. So, all right, sure. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking for clarity on that last, because that's pretty huge. So if there is, let's say Duke owns the utility pole and therefore the easement, but if we don't have history of any type of agreement, let's say the cable company is also attached to the pole, and they have no indication or they can't prove that they've actually contributed to the easement that Duke owns outside of the right-of-way, you're saying that we don't have to pay them for relocation in the future.
That's correct, under that general statute.
Good.
That's correct.
Okay, that's huge. So
Yes,
just making sure that I understood that first.
Yep, that is. That was a big one. We were wondering how the village was going to react to that.
Yeah.
That was tough.
Yeah.
And so after we rolled that out, I called the director of AT&T in North Carolina, and I told him, I said, hey, just want to let you know, nothing personal, right? This is what we're getting ready to do. And I said, well, I told him why. And his response to me was, he's like, yeah, I'm surprised y'all didn't do that earlier, right? And so there was a lot of times, I talked back on my first slide, why are we doing this? Because we've always done it that way. Is it right? That's why we're kind of going to bucket the grade a little bit here and making sure we're acting in accordance with the law. But you're right, that one was a big one. But some interesting responses have been when we told the normal, actually, I'm sorry, that's more of what we're getting ready to talk about here. So, adverse possession. So what we saw after we said no more on JUAs, and everyone is coming after us with adverse possession. Okay, so adverse possession, they're saying, yeah, my facilities have been outside the right-of-way for more than 20 years, therefore you should pay me, right? And they would send an attestation letter, sometimes signed by a clerk or a technician, in the organization. And there again, we're like, why are we even paying on adverse possession just because they've existed outside the right-of-way for more than 20 years? So we've had our legal take a better look at that. And so, lo and behold, right, to file a valid claim of adverse possession, there are 7 legal requirements that need to occur before the case can even be considered, right? So, I'll share those with you. We published this letter back in October of last year, and it's a couple-page document. It's got some tables in there. This is what it needs to look like in order to claim adverse possession. So some of the divisions, when they got this, they're like, Keith, this is like really legal. Like, why can we like dumb it down? And we were like, look, anytime you make a change with a utility company, what's going to happen? They're gonna send it right to their legal. So our thought was, okay, let's just cut to the chase. We know they're going to send it to the legal. So our legal essentially crafted this, and I signed my name on it, right? And so this has, there's been a lot of responses out of this as well, okay? Interesting. So after we soft launched this thought, all of a sudden, right, so utility companies that typically come in after us for JUAs or adverse possession, all of a sudden, they're saying, oh, by the way, I've got an easement, right? And they said, yeah, I had to go down to the courtroom, spend a week digging around, but I found it, right? So there again, right, there's complacency. Just because, we always accepted the JUA, we always accepted adverse possession, the utility company did not have any drive or motivation to provide the clear and convincing evidence, right? So this one here is not done. I think there's still some interest, particularly from our smaller municipality or EMCs. But there again, we have deployed this consistently across the department. So all the utilities, municipalities are hearing a consistent message. And so hopefully here before too long, this is all going to kind of die down. Now, we're not ruthless. We certainly understand that this right here is a big change for some of our smaller utility partners. So what we have developed is a transition plan, okay? So, a utility company, just like, private firms, they need to, put a budget together for money they want to spend next year and the year after. Well, if we have started a highway project, say early stage 2, and at that point in time, the utility company did not put into their budget for, say, 2 years later when they'd actually have to be doing relocation work, they don't have that money just sitting, ready to go accommodate our project. So we kind of, we drew a line in the sand. We said, okay, look, for all those projects out there where there's already been an understanding, a mutual agreement between the department and the utility where we're going to pay based on this or even a joint use agreement, we're not going to undo that, okay? We're gonna honor the commitment. But please know, on the next project, here's a line in the sand, you will be expected to, accommodate or abide by the statutes. So that's still, still waiting to play that one out. But we have a lot of projects out there that we made some commitments, and we're honoring those commitments. And so more to come. So maybe this time next year at the pre-con, I'll be able to give an update on where we are with this. So, all right, how am I doing on time here? I'm kind of rambling.
We're doing all right.
2 minutes, couple minutes? Okay, perfect. So I got a couple slides I slid in here, and Liam's in the room here. He can gut check me here. But I wanted to take this opportunity with everyone in here to talk about, just to make sure everyone is aware, right? There's been a lot of changes with Buy America and BABA, predominantly in decades past. It's mainly been focused on like iron and steel, but under the new requirements, you can see this bulleted item. We've got, and now takes construction materials into play as well, in addition to how products are manufactured, how they show up on a job site. So some of the things that we're just kind of getting our heads wrapped around in pre-construction And Liam and Troy and their team have done a great job of putting together some guidance from the construction perspective, the construction side, how to be compliant. We're looking at doing something similar on the pre-construction side. What are milestones, checkpoints that we can develop, incorporate into our PDN to make sure we're not missing the mark with helping to stay in compliance. So essentially, talking about design and scoping decisions. And I think Liam, you talked about maybe doing some cursory checks during pre-construction to see the viability of that material being in the bucket of compliance, right? But obviously that's not true verification and compliance. That won't come later till the project's delivered. But anyway, looking ahead to make sure we're not stepping in the wrong direction, to help us to success there. So more to come on that. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to put that out there that might be that will be something that our consultant community will see more of. So, all right, any questions or comments before we start our next session? Yes, sir. Yeah. Edge of right away.
You can, yeah.
The utility company claimed that they had right-of-way on the adjacent property, even though it wasn't purchased. And so when the right-of-way got widened, they were claiming that was their right-of-way and needed to be, there was potential for compensation. I'm assuming part of this new portion or some of these new rules kind of negate some of that.
Yeah, so that kind of drops back to our first slide. Just utilities claiming prior rights because they were there. They don't have an easement that they can show, right? A lot of times they don't even have agreements with the customers that they're serving, right? So clear and convincing evidence, right?
And then the second one is mainly applies to transmission lines, but as far as like for the maintenance side of DOT, where new subdivisions come in and they're going to run a road under a transmission line, once that right-of-way is dedicated, does that policy become into effect that DOT becomes basically the controlling landowner in that, everything has to then comply. It's DOT's and not easement controlled at that point.
Something like after a DOT project obtains right-of-way.
Well, in this case would be like private development donates to NCDOT.
Okay.
With NCDOT, they would require Duke's permission to build whatever improvements. Afterwards, after that, it becomes you don't have that ability, like you said.
So you're talking about not
a construction project, but
yeah, just a
donated project.
I got you. Yeah, so I can promise you that in situations like that, Duke Transmission will be heavily involved in making sure the developer is developing in accordance to, and then the backside would be any land that's donated back to DOT. Right, Duke's gonna be looking. Do they have access? Can they own, operate, maintain? Those would be tricky situations. Kyle and I have been in some rooms before when transmission was on the call with Florida DOT, and the folks there did not have quite an understanding of how transmission works, and there was a project going on, and transmission was just leaning into them. And Kyle and I in the background, like, man, that's like transmission 101. Like, you can't do that. You can't put a wall in their easement, right? And the other folks in the room are like, why can't I put a wall in your easement, right? But yeah, they have I know we're up on time. Transmission has more right-of-way, or Duke Energy has more right-of-way in North and South Carolina than North Carolina and NCDOT put together for road right-of-way, right? By about almost 2 times, right? So they're very sensitive about, encroachees, if you will, right, in their right-of-way. But anything else before we transition? Got one over here, Ms. Heather?
Thank you. In our division, as you know, Keith, we related to the adverse possession, we do have a lot of small the EMC's power, especially in our rural areas. And so, again, a lot of great conversations have been had, getting them up to speed with our policies and things of that nature related to this. But one of our primary concerns is with those smaller companies is just the financial burden that this places on them. And so, especially with our smaller projects like safety, bridge program, which are delivered at a faster rate, the time frame at which they need to prepare financially for their program to cover these costs is a challenge. So I know there's some initial conversations. Has there been any kind of statewide or more kind of consistent way to tackle maybe like a stepped approach towards really that need?
Yes. So, I mentioned, a transition plan, right? So the transition plan can look different. You can mold it to your need. I know, we came down and talked with y'all in division. For those type companies, transition plan may need to be in place longer, right? So they do have time to account or accommodate our future projects. But you asked, does anyone do anything from a larger, or any other conversations? Funny you ask. So 2 weeks ago, is Daniel in the room? No. Dan Johnson, our secretary. So guess where he was 2 weeks ago? He had a meeting with the North Carolina Electric Executives, which is a coalition of small EMCs, primarily in eastern North Carolina. And so Daniel's office reached out to me and said, hey, Keith, is there anything that Daniel should know about this meeting that came up that they want him to attend? And I said, oh, boy, right? Here it comes. And so anyway, he's had the meeting. He survived. And he just directed them all to call me if they have questions. So where we can talk about a transition plan that works for everybody, right? So good question. Hey, none of this stuff is easy. It's hard, right? Yes, that consistency is huge. Yeah, good point. All right, everyone, I do appreciate it. That's everything I had. Thank you all. You've been a lovely audience.
All right, thank you. How many of you folks in the room are aware of the DOT broadband deployment, know that it's a thing? How many are aware? Great, now forget about it. The reason why is because part of this presentation, part of the points of emphasis is the rebranding of broadband to the North Carolina Commercial Fiber Partnership. Broadband means different things to different people. First thing that might come to your mind is Spectrum or AT&T or Google or your internet provider. If folks have been around a long time or they know about the NC-REN network or the NC network, they may be thinking about that. But one of the purposes of this presentation is to roll out this new concept of the fiber partnership. That's probably the number one purpose. But we also want to spread the good word. We want to educate about what we're up to. Want you to know who the players are. Want you to know where we have infrastructure. We also want to have a brief discussion about the applicability of the UAM and clarify responsibilities and applicable standards. Some of the history here, I have another presentation that goes into the history a lot. I really like that presentation, but it's long. But basically, before this project, we had plenty of fiber and plenty of devices, but we did not have great connectivity. We did not have great uptime. And so this project was, one of its main purposes was to solve that and to basically make our network and our traffic management system, elevate it to the next level. So we want to do that by deploying over 600 miles of new fiber and new ITS devices along 3 major corridors, all of I-95, US 70 from Raleigh to Morehead City, and US 74 from Wilmington all the way to Asheville. The secondary purpose of the project was to create a public-private partnership that would allow a third party to install their infrastructure in a dig-once approach and give them the opportunity to lease out that infrastructure, still belongs to the state, but lease out that infrastructure to the commercial sector and generate revenue that the state would share to defray the maintenance cost of these new devices and this new fiber. This was not previously clearly allowable under the statutes in the late 2000 teens. There's something called the Umstead Act that's been around for quite a long time, which prevented the state from basically competing with the private sector. However, since the Umstead Act was passed, there have been many, many exceptions written into law, probably the most notable of which is the Centennial campus here at NC State, just right around the corner. So in around 2019, the chief's office basically worked with the legislature to basically codify what we wanted to do here and make it clearly above board. Bobby Lewis, who was in the chief's office then, was very instrumental in getting this legislation passed. And there's a lot of detail here that I don't really have time to get into, but basically we retain the full ownership of that infrastructure, but the company can enter into partnering agreements for no more than 50 years. So we had a procurement process that I was not personally involved in, but that procurement process had several different possible approaches. Track one was a two-sided approach where there would be a design-build project that would build the infrastructure. There would be a second track or a second contract that would operate, maintain, and commercialize the infrastructure. There was a track two that was more of a P3 partnership. Through this procurement, it was determined that the best value to the state was track one, which established kind of the two-headed monster. It took a village. It takes a village. There are many, many players, some of which are in the room here, to both the design-build team, the OMC team, as well as the management team. A couple of the folks are in the room. Gosh. This project is managed by Division 4. Why Division 4? Because it's the best division? No. No. Corey and Brandon back there, this project started in Division 4. We started basically around Selma. We spent the first year or so in Division 4 constructing on I-95. I'd also like to recognize our prime contractor on the design-build side, BBH. Their design team included Summit. Greg, back there, wave. You back? Is Greg still in the room? There he is. So on the DOT side, involvement from many, many different units. We've gotten great support from the chief's office, from Troy, and from Liam. We've also been working with Butch Zadeller and utilities, and various folks in TISMO, including another group of folks in this room, Andrew in the back there, Andrew Scoos, first couple of years of the project, Alex, and then most recently, Nathan and Ryan. So a lot of folks have touched this since we've gotten started around 2021. Also want to recognize Priority Projects and David Stark, who really probably knows more about this and the history of this than anyone. All right, so what did we do? Well, we started building in 2021 like I said, around Selma. We built conduit. We installed fiber. Our contractor installed fiber. We put in a limited number of new ITS devices, cameras, but no DMSs that were not part of this project. We built a lot of fiber optic drops to existing devices that were on somewhat reliable cell phones to create better uptime. We installed 2 fiber optic cables, a 96 and a 144. And then once we're done on a segment-by-segment basis across the state, we toss the segment over the fence, metaphorically, for the OMC contractor to maintain. That started around 2023. We turned over the first segment. The OMC contractor, Plenary, They assume all maintenance responsibilities for fiber and devices, but they have the opportunity to do the C part. The C part is the commercialize. There's a third conduit in our conduit bundle that is available for them to do what they wish to, which turns out what they wished to do was to install microducts, which are basically tiny little conduits, install their own fiber, but it's our fiber, but it's their choice of what they want to install, up to 432 fibers to date. They've also have been installing regeneration facilities, primarily at our rest areas on 995. I don't know if anyone's happened to see something that looks strangely like a cell phone building at a rest area. That's part of the broadband project. They also are constructing laterals off the control of access, usually headed towards a data center or some private facility. The OMC also, unfortunately, has to also handle relocations. We've already had several of those. So where are we? I mentioned the 3 corridors earlier. We have completed all the work on 995 and turned it over to the OMC. We have completed all the work on US 70 and turned it over to the OMC. We've completed work starting in Wilmington all the way to approximately Rockingham, and we have started work on the west side of Charlotte in Division 12 and Division 10. Everywhere where you see a very thin yellow line in the middle of the green, that's where the commercialization contractor has started their activity, including pulling a fiber or installation of microducts. And everywhere you see one of these little pentagons is where they're installing a regeneration hut. A couple of them we've just learned about and are not shown. Our contract with the OMC requires us to turn over everything east of Charlotte by this August, and we'll hit that date, and requires us to turn over everything to Asheville by August 2028, and we should hit that date as well. This is another way of showing our progress. Like I said, we have 33 segments across the state. You can kind of visually see how this is North Carolina's I-95, US 70, and US 74. We turned over the most recent segment around Rockingham last week, and we got one more to go this month before we're done east of Charlotte. 500 miles of fiber, roughly 57 new cameras are constructed and online, roughly 200 existing drops to ITS, over 200 drops to existing ITS devices, and many power services and quite a few railroad encroachment agreements. This slide, I'm not going to delve into. I thank Matt Carlisle for this slide, but basically Matt was tasked with building the case that this infrastructure is not a utility. That was a point of contention with some folks, but basically the point of the exercise was to define this infrastructure as a state asset that was not subject to the Utility Accommodations Manual, because there are differences. If you're a designer and you're designing as a part of a large roadway project or a standalone project and you're building this infrastructure, the usual standards that you would design for TSMO would still apply. And if you were involved in a relocation of this infrastructure, the usual standards of TSMO would still apply. Now, there is some contract language in the design-build contract about adhering to the Utilities Accommodation Manual, but that applies if you're relocating a utility within a project, not our assets. What's the difference? Well, there's a couple of differences. The UAM is pretty clear that they would prefer perpendicular crossings of the control of access. We strive for that, but there are several cases in which that's not the best approach for our infrastructure. One reason is that we're blowing fiber throughout the entire project, not pulling it in the traditional manner. So easing those angles can be very advantageous to blowing fiber. Also, we have to do relocations where we're trying to avoid major roadway infrastructure, culverts, and such that are under construction, and we need the flexibility to not be straitjacketed by a perpendicular crossing. There are also different standards for the offset of conduit in the UAM, as well as the depth of conduit, but these are not applicable to our assets that we are constructing out there today. How is this infrastructure different? Like I said before, in most cases, we're not going to be the only user. Not only are there commercial possibilities, but there is traffic to the rest areas and way stations that will also be on this network. And a reliable network is essential. The commercialized traffic includes, like I say, communication between data centers, and that's something where you just can't tolerate, a day of downtime. Downtime's never been that important in DOT for ITS devices. Okay, that camera can be offline for a week while we move this. Well, no commercial entity is going to enter an agreement where you tell them that, are you prepared for a week of downtime? They're not prepared for 4 hours of downtime. So obviously, if there is damage to this facility, there will be a loss of commercial revenue and a corresponding loss of revenue to the state. So it is essential that we identify the infrastructure and keep it safe. This is more for the construction folks, but there are a couple of hints that you're running into our infrastructure. You see the green duct coming out of the ground there. Green is not a very common color for DOT conduit, but somebody probably with a sense of humor decided to have that spare be green for money. And there's an indication that you're dealing with, you've discovered our conduit. Also here you can see the microducts, the orange microducts coming out of the 1.25" conduit. That's another flag that this is our broadband infrastructure. There I go, using broadband again. Our CFP infrastructure. How are we going to avoid impacts and damage and loss of revenue? Education, very liberal use of fiber optic markers, proper NC 811 procedures. We talked about that. There was an entire presentation on that at the AGC conference. Contractor coordination is essential. We really do appreciate the many state forces across the state who are widening projects and resident engineers who have worked with us to do our best to avoid impacts. One cool fact here is our infrastructure is locatable from the moment it goes in the ground. Our tracer wire is in the conduit. It's not pulled with the fiber. So as soon as they put the conduit in the ground, it can be located. So what do you do? What do you need to know? Well, if you are working on a project that is on one of those 3 corridors, be safe and just pick up the phone and call Ryan or Nathan or Matt Carlisle and learn more about where this infrastructure is. We're in the midst of an education effort where we'll put this information online. We will distribute it to the divisions in a variety of different forms. But the key things to remember are those 3 corridors, 95, 70, and 74. And when in doubt, pick up the phone. What do we do if there is a conflict? Well, we have a couple of options. One of which is if the design build team has not left the segment yet, we can ask them to relocate it. This is very cost effective if they have not pulled the fiber yet. We can relocate the fiber prior to a project's construction. We can use the OMC contractor to do that, or, and most ideally, we can relocate it within the project that's going to be in conflict with it, such as a bridge project or a roadway widening project. That's probably the best way to do this, and the TSMO group has been finalizing ICTs for including that in larger projects, but obviously that's more of a downstream approach for projects that have not or aren't close to letting. We can also think about and possibly execute a temporary reroute to avoid a major project. This This is under heavy consideration in Belmont and Gastonia for the 5719B project. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of impacts, over 60. Anything from backhoes to beavers have damaged our infrastructure. And we really need to do a better job of educating and working with our contractors and making sure people understand the implications of damage to this infrastructure. We also want to make sure our encroachment, when contractors are pursuing encroachment agreements with DOT, that utilities is aware of our infrastructure and puts in the proper language in those encroachment agreements to protect our assets. I told you where we are today. Where are we going? Well, the next phase of the broadband, there I go again, broadband. This next phase of the CFP deployment is US 64, all the way from I-95 to the Outer Banks. That project will be let, I believe, this summer. That's 120 new miles of fiber infrastructure. There's a small project currently underway from Kings Mountain to the South Carolina border, 5719 FC, which has been awarded and is under construction. And just mentally wrap your head around wherever you see a pin is either a data center or a mega site or some nexus of commercial activity that we would suspect that commercialization entities would be interested in, like all the data centers around Lenore, for instance. So be on the lookout, and next year we'll talk about where we're going next. I've mentioned most of these points before. We do have a goal of integrating with the PDN and embedding this information in the PDN so that designers will know what to look out for and how to design. We're also working on rolling out a fiber asset management system where you won't have to pick up the phone anymore. You can just go online and say, oh, that dashed yellow line means broadband or CFP. We want to make sure that folks are clear on the fact that this is not a utility, that this is a state asset. We want to make sure that folks are following the proper NCA 11 procedures so that we can prevent as much damage as possible to our infrastructure. And we want to educate. I'm out of breath, but I did manage to leave 15 minutes for questions, and I would love to entertain them. Come on, somebody's got a question.
So in the future, when this is up and running and complete, essentially, would we treat this as a UBO to be relocated prior to construction of a future project, or is this considered a state asset to be relocated in contract by our contractor for that project?
We would prefer the latter because it basically puts the onus on the contractor to come up with a plan, not only to relocate, but to relocate with the minimum amount of downtime according to contract terms that we write. So that is definitely our vision. However, one size probably doesn't fit all, and some of these smaller projects around the state, it might be easier if our OMC contractor relocates it. Like I say, one size doesn't fit all. But ideally, this is something that will become the norm for large widening projects and bridge replacements.
Will we treat you the same way that we treat ITS?
I think the smile suggests that's a trick question.
No. No, we coordinate with ITS almost as if they were a utility. Of course, they're a state facility, but they have to play with the project much the same way as the telecom does. We help them recognize conflicts.
I think what the answer to that question is that the state has the ITS resiliency contractor who's responsible for keeping the uptime on the non-CFP network. Those requirements are very similar to the same requirements within our contract. So basically, we're treating it the same, but I don't want to suggest that the same is business as usual.
So we would be coordinating with you at the beginning, identifying possible conflicts.
Yes.
And you would be responsible for design, picking your own means of relocation. We would just simply help keep you out of the way of the utilities and other utilities too. Them out of your way as well.
Okay, I'm a little confused with who the we is and who
I'm
who the you is.
I'm in the utilities unit.
Okay.
We're doing utilities coordination. There's a lot of utilities coordinators in here.
Yes. Yeah. Ideally, these relocations would be embedded within the larger projects. But again, one size not fitting all. We do have a couple of other arrows in our quiver and other ways to approach it.
So a follow-up to both is, who is responsible for the design of the relocation for the project? Is that something that's going to be done by our firm on the project development side as part of the project, or is that going to be like a separate group from their side that provides us with a design for the contract?
Our intent is for that to be embedded within the RFP. All the requirements regarding relocation and design should be embedded in the RFP, included in the bid of the contractors, and performed by the contractors.
So the design itself of the relocation would be a part of the contract?
Yes.
Okay.
Andrew?
Just to, I guess, add to that. For the ones we've done, the divisions that have reached out to do one of these relocations, whether it was to have the OMC relocate it or the project relocate it, it's kind of, if it's a TIP, like a large TIP project we're widening and the contractor, the project itself is going to do the relocation, if the division has a design contract in place for that project and they're able to add ITS to it, that's the preferred way. If that's not possible, if it's a small relocation, but we still want it done by the project, the ITS design folks, I don't want to speak for Ryan and Nathan, but we could do the design in-house. But if you have a contractor or a design firm in place that can do ITS designs, that would be the preferred way to actually handle the design of that relocation.
Thank you, Andrew. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention was yesterday there was talk about hurricanes, Matthew and Florence. And part of the slideshow that I have on the history of this is, how did this start? It started with those hurricanes, because those hurricanes helped, or the reaction to those hurricanes had the state ask for a variety of federal grants to help make I-95 more secure and more resilient to a future hurricane. Included in those grant applications was the CFP infrastructure, which helped improve the cost-benefit ratio of those applications and win that money. So really, the core reason why this started was because of those hurricanes.
Do we have any more questions?
Not yet, but that is definitely a very short-term goal to get that information publicly available as soon as possible. To a certain level of detail, not to the level of fiber counts and that sort of thing. Yeah, cash flow will not be publicly available. We might be able to say which side of the road you're on. That might be of help to someone doing a preliminary investigation. But more deep than that, probably not publicly available. All right. Seeing no more, thank you.